In this video, I'm going to explain how to graph absolute value functions. You can work these problems along with me and feel free to pause as needed. An absolute value function has a V-shaped graph that opens up or down. A function in its simplest form is known as the parent function. The parent function of absolute value functions is y equals the absolute value of x. The graph of the parent function is going to have a point at the origin. The reason we know that the point will be at the origin is because if I take 0 and plug it in for x, then I would have y equals the absolute value of x. And so if I plug in 0 for x, I would have y equals the absolute value of 0, and the absolute value of 0 is 0. So when x is 0, y is also 0, and that coordinate would be 0, 0, which is at the origin. I also need two other points in order to draw this graph. So if I take one point on the left side of the vertex and then take one point on the right side of the vertex, that will give me the V shape that I need to draw the graph. So if I choose the point that's just to the left of the origin, then I'm going to choose maybe when x is -1. So when I plug in -1 for x, then I would have y equals the absolute value of -1, and the absolute value of -1 is 1. So my new point is -1, 1. When x is -1, y is 1. So now I need a point on the right side of the vertex, so I'm just going to choose when x is 1, and I'm going to plug that into our original equation. So if I plug in 1 to our original equation, then I have y equals the absolute value of 1, and the absolute value of 1 is 1, so my new point is 1, 1. So I would plot that point at 1, 1, and then I could draw my graph. So this is what the parent function of the absolute value graph would look like. Notice your vertex is at 0, 0, and then you need a point on the left side of the vertex and also the right side of the vertex, and then you can draw your graph. The next thing I'm going to talk about is translations and how these graphs will shift. Okay, so here are some notes on translation. And translation is a shift of a graph horizontally, vertically, or both. And the number outside of the absolute value sign will indicate a vertical shift. For example, if we have y equals the absolute value of x plus 3, this plus 3 will indicate a vertical shift. This will be the graph of y equals the absolute value of x, which is the parent function, only this will actually be shifted 3 units up. That plus 3 on the outside indicates that we will shift our graph 3 units up. Okay, and this text to the lower left says the number inside of the absolute value sign will indicate a horizontal shift. So for example, if I have y equals the absolute value of x minus 2, this will be the graph of y equals the absolute value of x shifted 2 units to the right. And I will explain that. I'm going to graph both of these two examples in just a moment. And but just make sure that you know that the number in operation going on inside of the absolute value sign indicates a horizontal shift. If there is a number in operation outside of the absolute value sign, that will indicate a vertical shift. Okay, so I have my coordinate plane here, and I have the equation of y equals the absolute value of x plus 3, and I'm going to show you how you would graph this. And so first I'm going to graph the parent function of this, and I'll graph that in black, and then I will graph the y equals the absolute value of x plus 3. I'll graph it in red so you can see how it vertically shifts. Okay, so in black, I graphed the parent function, which is y equals the absolute value of x. And then in red, I graphed the new function here that shows the vertical shift. And it's y equals the absolute value of x plus 3. And it is shifted 3 units up. Okay, so now I'm going to show the graph of the absolute value function when it is shifted horizontally. And so this one we have y equals the absolute value of x minus 2. But first I'm going to graph the absolute value function, the parent function, and I'll graph it in black again so you can see. Okay, so now this graph is in red. It's showing how it shifted 2 units to the right. And so this is our horizontal translation. And it may be kind of confusing because it has x minus 2. So most of the time you'd probably say, well, that's going to shift to the left. But in this case, it doesn't. With these absolute value functions, when you have x minus 2, when you start plugging in values for x, you will see that it is actually going to shift right. Okay, so when you're trying to figure out how it's going to shift if you're not sure, you can take this equation and see, okay, when is y going to be 0? So I'm trying to find the vertex here, and so what I can do is say, what can I plug in for x that will make y 0? So if you look at this, x minus 2, and we're taking the absolute value of that, so we can plug in 2, because 2 minus 2 is going to give us 0, and then the absolute value of 0 is 0. So when x is 2, y is 0, so you would have the point 2, 0. And so right there, since that 2 is positive, you're going to go over 2 units to the right on the x-axis, and then you're going to plot that point there. And so you can already see that y equals the absolute value of x minus 2. You're actually going to be shifting 2 units to the right. And this concludes the video for this lesson. I will probably do more videos later where we will have a horizontal and vertical shift all in the same graph. But for the purpose of this lesson right now, all we were going to do was the vertical shifts and the horizontal shifts separately so that you can understand how to do those separately. And then we may put it all together later on in a future lesson.